All right, so we are a few days out from the embargo on the Player's Handbook 2024 lifting. The YouTubers and content creators who received advanced copies will be able to spill the beans on what's inside, but of course, Wizards of the Coast have already given us a lot of information. They've showed off on all of the subclasses at this point, and they have also shown off other stuff such as some spells, rules, just a bit of everything, really. So what I wanted to do in this video was just talk about what we've seen so far and go through what I think is good, what I think is bad, and what I think is really ugly. Unfortunately, there are some stuff in the new Player's Handbook that I'm really not a fan of, or that I think they really missed the ball with. I will say, just as a preemptive statement from me here, the new 2024 Player's Handbook will be a better version of 5e. I have no doubts about that. I think the majority of the changes they've made are for the better, and even where they haven't made huge changes, they have made small quality of life adjustments that I think will make the game better. So that out of the way. I will also say that this critique comes from a point of this being a very minor revision to the game. So the analogy I could use is something like you go to the mechanic and you tell them to completely overhaul your car, make it a brand new car, and if you get it back a month later and there's a small issue with the rear mirror or one of the wheels is not completely aligned, you'll be like, okay, yeah, they did completely remake the car, so of course there might be some minor issues here. That's not what's going on here. What we've done is we've taken the car to the mechanic and we said, we don't want you to overhaul anything. We don't even want you to really replace parts as much as just polish it up, make sure it's well oiled, make sure it's completely road ready, make sure there's no imperfections. And then you come back a month later, or in this case, 3 years later, and there's still imperfections, and maybe they even added some imperfections. So that's the kind of critique that I think. That's why I think this kind of critique is warranted, because they haven't really had to do a lot. They just had to fine-tune stuff. So it's disappointing when it's not completely fine-tuned. Anyway, let's jump in and let's start with some of the positive stuff. First off, you got to mention the monk. The monk seems to be good, which is nice. I may be in the minority, but I really like what they did with Sonic Strike. I have already nerfed that in my game and given the monk a lot of other buffs, of course, which is what Wizards of the Coast have done now. The monk is really, really, really strong, it seems like, at least compared to other martials, and I think it might be the best, or at least the most fun martial class at this point, which is really, really nice, because the monk has, for a long time, not really been a viable, playable class from a power perspective, so love that. Likewise, Barbarian Fighter, much improved. They haven't gotten the same gigantic overhaul as the monk have, but they have gotten these quality of life adjustments. They have gotten some extra features, some extra power. Some of their less awesome features or less awesome subclasses have been improved. And I think these core martial classes are in a much better spot in the 2024 version than they were before. So I really love to see that. There are, of course, some things I would have done differently or slightly, but I think it's easy to say that they are in a better spot, and I think that's good. Similarly, I'm also excited about the Sorcerer and the Warlock. I think that they finally managed to bring it up to the Wizards level, bring both of those classes up to the Wizards level. I think they have some really strong stuff going on. I will say that I'm kind of disappointed that Warlock is still probably looking like a one-level charisma and all attacks kind of dip, which was before the Hexblade, and now it's just the main Warlock class. That's a dip that I really hate. I don't love that that's something that most paladins or stuff like that would just have to do to, or feel like they have to do, because it's such a good dip. That said, Sorcerer, a lot of new features, some rebalances, some better spell list, better subclasses, very nice. I've actually played the playtest Sorcerer in a home game, and I really enjoyed it because it has so much more to do, or it has more to do at least. As for the Warlock, same thing. It's gotten a lot of stuff added, more spells known, a deeper pool of invocations, stuff like that. I really like what they've done to the Warlock and the Sorcerer to bring it up to the Wizard level. Of course, that does nothing to make the Martial caster gap smaller, but that's what you get. Species, I also really like what they did with the species. We also got a list of the 10 species that will be in the player's handbook. I think it was 10. And I like what they did there. They moved the stat points thing from it. They rebalanced a lot of them. They made some of the useless features more useful. And I think that overall the species are more carefully balanced than they were before, and and more of them are viable options for your character. So I think that's really nice. I don't have anything necessarily huge bad to say about that. I think that most of the changes they did there were the changes that should be made, and will make more of the species, playable. There's also been some core rule changes. We haven't, of course, seen all of them yet. That's some of the stuff that I'm really excited for. I know that Tree and Monk has prepared a lot of videos about that in just a few days. But some of the stuff that we have seen seems to be for the better. The surprise rules, for example, where now if you're surprised, you have disadvantage on initiative. That's a much better way to handle surprise than before, where surprise was like you win kind of thing. So I think that's been nice, and I think that we have seen glimpses of other clarifications, simplifications of the core rule set. There is, of course, some core rules that I would have loved to see changed, but that wasn't really in the cards after we found out it was more of a revision than actually a new edition or even a half edition. There's still stuff that I would have loved to see them make some more sweeping changes to, but I digress. This is the good stuff. And lastly, I think what's also overall good is clarifying and simplifying. I think it's really nice that they've gone in and, at least as far as we've heard, tried to clarify some of the things that really need clarification. They've tried to simplify some of the stuff that was overly complex. And that's really one of the main issues with the Player's Handbook from 2014. It wasn't always really clear how these rules work, how those rules work, what did it mean to stuff like that. So I'm excited to see where everything goes. So I can't say for sure yet that they have succeeded, but it's clear that they've done an effort in it, and I appreciate that. And I hope that they've also aligned all the spells so they are more similar in wording and stuff like that, because that's something that was really, really needed. There are probably more good stuff out there. There's also a ton of stuff that I, of course, haven't touched on here, but these are the main points for me where I think that the Player's Handbook showcases a better game. And now I want to talk a bit about the bad stuff. Bad in the sense that it's not necessarily catastrophic or anything. It's just something where I think they could have done better. First off is the Rogue. So as probably the only pure martial, the Rogue doesn't really come out of the playtest much better than it came in. It's gotten some upgrades. Cunning strikes are nice, but it's more of a versatility thing than a power thing. And I think that because the Barbarian and the Fighter and the Monk got these huge buffs, and the Rogue didn't, it's falling even further behind. And in my opinion, it was already pretty far behind. It's also falling farther behind because Rangers and Bards to some extent are getting more access to expertise. I'm not sure Bards are anymore, but Rangers are at least. So it's and Barbarians are getting these skill boosts, fighters are getting some skill boosts, so it's like the Rogue's spot in the game. It's just, maybe you don't need a Rogue because it's not going to be great in combat, and the skill thing can now be handled by other classes, so I think the Rogue is worse off, and that's a shame because I really, really love Rogues and the whole assassin playstyle, and I don't think the new Rogue really hits the mark on that. Then there's the Tasha subclasses across the board, but for some classes more than others. The grabbing a Tasha subclass and just sticking it on one of these revised classes without really making any modifications is disappointing. I think they should have stuck to, like, they had this thing where they want 4 subclasses for each class, and these should be like diametrically opposed classes or different themes that mirror each other, stuff like that, where I would have much more appreciated they just took the 4 subclasses that really needed to be updated most or added in new subclasses, because some of the like transports of subclasses to the new Player's Handbook just feel a bit lazy. You're grabbing a subclass that's really okay. There's maybe a minor wording change you'll make, but it's basically the same as it was in Tasha's. I think that's just a bit disappointing. I'd love to see more new subclasses or revisions of the really bad ones, like the Storm Sorcerer. It would have been awesome to see a playable Storm Sorcerer. Yeah. Another thing I really don't like is uneven recovery, where you have this new thing they've introduced where you get like X uses on a long rest of something, but you can get 1 use back on a short rest once per day. I hate that feature so much because it's just extra bookkeeping. It's complex. Where do you have to put down on your sheet that, yeah, I get 4 uses per day, but then once per day I can get 1 use back, and then I like, please just keep it more simple. There's already so many resources you have to track in D&D, with something come back on short rest, something come back on long rest, spell slots, key points, whatever you have, and now you also got to track something that sometimes come back on a short rest. Yeah. Enough said. I really don't like this feature. I think they could have. It's a complexity for very, very little gain that they could have handled in a different way. Maybe the first use is free is a better mechanic because you don't have to track that. You can just like don't track that you use the feature first time use it, or just maybe give 1 more use of the feature per long rest, and let that be that. Yeah. So not a huge fan of that. Another thing is weapon masteries, which on the one hand, I am a fan of because it's obviously something that makes martial classes better, and I'm all about that. It's also just very complex in its executions, its introduction. It's also, in a lot of ways, not a huge benefit, and it makes the game run slower or combat run slower. We've tested them out. We only had 1 class in our. We only have 1 player using weapon masteries, like every turn, so it didn't slow the game down much, though he did forget to use them sometimes. But if you have 2, 3 martial classes and you use the ones with saving throws and stuff like that, it really does slow down the game, I imagine. And I don't think the gain is high enough. I would have loved them to be implemented in a different way, really. Both from a whole, when do you get them, how do you get them, and also in what do they do, so that it has minimal impact on the, so it's just less complex overall and less finicky. Another thing I rounded out with a class is the Druid, which I think got some quality of life improvements overall, and I will say that I think Wild Shape is more balanced than it was before, which is nice. Because they had some really weird issues, and the HP thing, it's probably going to be more fun also with the stat blocks we're probably hopefully going to have. But I will say that I'm still disappointed they didn't go with the template style, or that they didn't do something a bit more interesting with it, so that the Druid wild shaping into a combat creature isn't. It obviously shouldn't be better than a fighter or a Barbarian or whatever, but it should be something you would do, where now it's purely for scouting and stuff, unless you're the Moon Druid, and we still have to see that in play, whether or not that's going to be actually good enough to compete with martial classes. But yeah, not a huge fan of what they did with the Druid. I think they could have done better, basically. So, and then we get to the ugly, if this video wasn't already long enough, but let's just dive in, and I'll start with the Ranger. Alongside the Monk, the Ranger was one of the least liked classes in 2014, maybe even the least liked. And while the Monk got the whole kitchen sink thrown at it, was improved in so many ways, the 2024 Ranger basically just got the optional class features from Tashes baked in, and some extra Hunter's Mark usability. I think there's several issues with this. First off, it just lost a lot of the flavor that made it unique. You can say what you want about favorite terrain or favorite enemy, but they were flavorful features, even if they weren't good features. Now they get Hunter's Mark instead, which is the second issue, is that, well, if everything is just baked into Hunter's Mark, if you don't use Hunter's Mark, what then, if you want to concentrate on another spell, if you wanted to do a multi-class thing where you had to concentrate, you're just losing out on class features. And you say, well, the Ranger doesn't really need those, it's strong enough without them. Yeah, but it still feels bad to have a class feature that you're not going to use. It's your capstone feature, which is really lackluster when you compare it to every other martial class. You get the worst, a +2 damage per attack improvement, which is horrible when you have barbarians and monks getting +4 to 2 different stats. Yeah, so maybe Hunter's Mark can compete for the Ranger with other concentration spells at higher levels, and it might not be an issue. But I really think it's just unimaginative. And when the Ranger was one of the classes that really needed the most help, I feel it's disappointing that this is what we get. I think they had to spend more time on the Ranger. They had to do something better. They had to maybe rethink it from the ground up instead of just going all in on Hunter's Mark, because it's not exciting for me to, I get to have this concentration spell that I have to concentrate on. If there's a non-magic zone, or if I run out of spell slots, or if blah, 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 I'm just useless. Don't love it. Don't love it. Backgrounds, I ranted about this in another video, but I absolutely hate that they put ability increases on the backgrounds, because it moves the issues of some species being obligatory for some builds or classes to now some backgrounds being obligatory instead. Some people responded to that video saying it wasn't a big deal, either because there'll be a variant rule to make custom backgrounds, or players who want that special flavor will just have to live with suboptimal ability scores, or it makes sense that most fighters are soldiers, or that most wizards are sages, and that's the background they come from, so who cares? I'll not spend a whole another video discussing this, but I think these are all bad arguments, because variant rules are in the DMG, then going to be subject to DM approval. Plus, we shouldn't really have to revise the revised player's handbook right out of the gate. Like, a rule in that new revised edition shouldn't be so bad for the majority of players that you don't use it. They've spent so much time putting out the backgrounds with nice art, and it's really pretty and it's really awesome, and you're not going to use that because they did it wrong. That's just bad design. Sorry. And B, flavor is important, but for many players, the majority likely, it will feel bad knowing that you're sacrificing your character's efficiency for flavor. So the whole argument that you can just, like, who cares if you have one less in an ability score, or you're a bit worse than the other player or characters. Well, most players care, and they will feel bad, and they'll be like, I picked the sage for my warrior or my fighter because that's what he was, and that's the kind of background, the story I want to tell. But it sucks that I'm a bit worse. Why couldn't I just be as good? Why do I have to be worse because I have this background? And you can say, but that's how the game is. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way. It was a revision. They could have not done it that way. They could have just let you assign +2 or +1 or 3 +1s, or they could have just made a different stat point by array. It wasn't difficult. They didn't have to do this. I can even buy the whole feats tied to it thing, but yeah. And the last point I'll say is that arguably tying abilities to backgrounds is worse than tying them to races, because before you could, like, maybe you say, okay, basically every wizard has to be an elf to get that boost to intelligence or whatever, or gnome or whatever, but you could still make a very different elf and another very different elf. They can have completely different cultures and backgrounds and stories. But if you tie it to the background, like, there's fewer, it's hard to be more creative with, like, every marshal in this party is going to be a soldier, has the best feat, has the best abilities, and it's more difficult to make 3 different kind of soldiers, I'd say, than it is to make the three different kind of elves. Even if you don't think it is, it's still the same problem. So I just fear it'll lead to samey and uninspired characters where you're like, I wanted to be an orphan who lived on the streets and then was taken by a monastery, but I have to be a soldier, so maybe I was instead just a soldier. Yeah, I don't like it. In the end, the main issue is that it was just so unnecessary. Is it the end of the world? No, and we'll just house rule it in our games, as we did with races before as well. But they had the right idea with removing abilities from species and just giving out to whatever, so this just feels like a giant step backwards. I also want to talk about spell modifications, because while we've seen and heard that some spells have been rebalanced, such as the conjuration spells, there are still, as far as we're hearing, a lot of spells that seem to have been unchanged and may still pose major problems. One we maybe had confirmed was that the shield spell isn't changed. I'll say I don't think the shield spell is the worst offender in this category. There are some that are definitely worse. But I think it's a spell where most players and DMs were like, probably we could tone this down just a little bit, at least at higher levels or something. Make sure it's not being completely overused. And there are a lot of ways you could do that quite easily. Disappointed if they haven't toned down the spells and or all of the problem spells, and it just doesn't seem like they've done so, at least if you hear from creators like Treant Monk, who's been very passionate about that subject, just like I am. It doesn't seem like they've gone as far as I would have liked them to go, which is something that would have brought down the casters in power, which is again something I think is healthy for the game. Yeah, I probably missed something. Maybe there's some good stuff that I forgot to talk about, some bad stuff that I should have thought about, and some horrible, ugly stuff that I didn't get into. But I'll say these are the main point for me, and these are where I think the game is landing. I'm very excited to see what comes out on Thursday, and of course to get the new Player's Handbook, because I will be buying it, and we will probably be playing with it. But yeah, those are my thoughts. If you have any thoughts on what I've said here, you have some counter arguments, I'm always willing to hear them, and please leave them in comments down below. If you like these kind of videos where I don't do a lot of editing and I just ramble on in one go and try not to make a whole lot of cuts, let me know. If you hate it, also let me know. The good thing about this style of video is that it's actually doable. Most of the time I don't have time to make a lot of videos because editing, scripting, blah blah takes a while, even if you don't do a whole lot of it like I don't. So being able to just turn on the camera and just speak and then put it up on the internet, that makes the process easier. And if you're all fine with it, well, you gotta be fine with it if you're here still, probably. So maybe I'll get some skewed comments down below like, yeah, we love it, like the 4 people who watched it to the end. Anyway, let me know what you think, and yeah, that's it for now. I hope that I'll see you in the next video.